Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing the 6th episode of the final season of Happy Days, Glove's Story.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Glove's story.
Fonzie enters Arnold's. He's having a rumble with the Bandini twins, and to Chachi's delight, he wants his cousin's help.
He's gonna rumble and he wants my help. The Fonzie's rumbling and he wants my help.
The twins arrive and everyone squares up, and Fonzie takes care of the situation without any help from Chachi. The dejected twins leave, promising next year they'll bring their big brother. Chachi complains to Joni that Fonzie doesn't respect him.
You believe what you just saw? Huh? He made a coat rack out of me.
She says he just doesn't want him to get hurt, and suggests talking to him about it. Chachi says talk doesn't impress Fonzie. Guts does. Guts like Tommy demonstrated when he tried the boxing tournament. He got beaten senseless, sure, but Fonzie drove him home every day until he remembered where he lived.
The city tournament starts in 2 weeks, and this kid is gonna be in it.
The next day at the gym, Roger is training Chachi. Howard has come by to offer training tips, since he's seen all the great fights. Roger insists he's got skill. He would have won a match in college if it hadn't been for woman trouble. An East German exchange student knocked him out in the 3rd round, but he got her back. He reported her when her visa ran out. Howard tries to demonstrate how to use a jump rope, only to fail.
You know, I used to be quite an expert at this when I was a wiry little guy.
Which life was that?
He claims the rope is too short, but Chachi uses it easily. He's exhausted, having just run several miles, but Roger makes him practice punching a bag that Roger begins projecting the East German onto.
Roger, that is not the East German woman!
I'm sorry, I guess I got carried away.
Fonzie shows up to congratulate Chachi on his upcoming first match and help him practice. The day of the match, Roger and Howard disagree over what tactics Chachi should use.
And let's use this first round to sort of feel out your opponent, all right?
Excuse me, I don't mean to butt in, but he's wrong.
Excited for Chachi, Fonzie has brought a robe that says Fonzie's cousin on the back.
And it practically has my name on it.
Here, slip into this.
Here.
Thanks,
Slip into
Fonzie.
this. I can't tell you how I feel.
The fight begins, with Marion and Joni watching uneasily. Then Marion shouts for Chachi to rip his opponent's limbs off. He doesn't, but he does knock his opponent out in the 1st round.
Faster!
The family is celebrating at home, with Chachi looking forward to the next match, when the doorbell rings, and in comes Leo Epps, who tells Chachi that when they fight, they'll turn him into the ugly guy at the circus.
Well, you can just forget about any cake, young man.
Fonzie wants to take him outside, but Chachi insists this is his fight, and Fonzie agrees. He threatens Chachi some more, in questionable rhyme.
I'm gonna knock you like a kangaroo in the zoo. They're gonna be picking up little pieces of you.
Then leaves. A while later, Chachi is lifting weights. He only has 3 more matches, and he wins the tournament. He starts shadowboxing, and then accidentally punches a door as it's being opened. When Roger asks what's wrong with his right hand, Chachi plays off his injury as a senior Wences impression. At the match, everyone is excited, except for Chachi.
There you are, ready to make the Fonzarelli name proud once again.
His opponent is Leo, who announces he'll grind Chachi into birdseed. When it starts, Chachi sticks to blocking, dodging, and the occasional hit with his left.
Ho, ha, guard, turn, parry, dodge, spin, ha, thrust.
Roger realizes something is wrong with Chachi's right, and Howard wants to throw the towel in. Chachi refuses and returns to the fight, and when it becomes clear he has no way of winning, Howard throws it in. Afterwards, Chachi and Fonzie are alone in the gym, and Fonzie asks why Chachi would do something so stupid. Chachi says he wanted Fonzie's friendship and respect, not just to be his cousin. The picture of Chachi he has in his wallet is from when he was 10.
Chachi, I do not treat you any differently than I treat anybody.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
But what would you like me to do about it?
It would be nice if for once he asked Chachi for advice, instead of the other way around. Fonzie admits he sometimes forgets Chachi grew up, and there are other ways to get respect than getting into a boxing ring, like looking someone in the eye and saying how they feel.
Tell them how you feel about muffins, pumpkins, wax paper.
Like Chachi just did. He lets Chachi wear his jacket and puts on the robe, now amended to say Chachi's cousin. They go to Arnold's, and Fonzie asks Chachi's advice on what flavor ice cream he should get.
How about pistachio?
Pistachio, my favorite.
Thank you, Peter. That was Glove Story. It first aired back on November 8th, 1983. Happy Days followed a new Just Our Luck, in which Shabu uses magic to spice up a dull party that Keith is hosting. Again, ABC came in third for the 8 o'clock hour. And Happy Days got slightly higher ratings than its lead-in.
Woohoo!
CBS had a new episode of The Mississippi. This one was called Joey and featured guest star Guy Killam in the title role. Ray Wise of Twin Peaks fame is also in this episode. And NBC again dominated the hour with a new episode of The A-Team, in which our heroes help some farm laborers who are being exploited by their bosses. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
Probably The A-Team.
I'm definitely watching The A-Team. America has obviously turned its back on Just Our Luck, and that is not going to change anytime soon.
I don't think anyone was interested in I Dream of Jeannie, but racist.
I think if they had called it I Dream of Jeannie, but racist, it might have actually gotten slightly higher ratings.
Just Our Luck is not a good title. It doesn't suggest this is about a genie in any way. If I had to guess from that title, I'd assume it was about gamblers or leprechauns or something.
Glove Story was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by our pal Fred Fox Jr. and Rich Carell. The last episode they wrote together was Turn Around and You're Home. This is Rich's last script credit on Happy Days, but he'll be with the show as an associate producer until the very end. As for guest stars this week, let's start with our main bad guy, Joe Napote as Leo Lunatic Epps.
When I get you in the ring, I'm gonna rip your face off so bad you're gonna be the ugly man in the circus.
Joe is an actor from Detroit who was at the beginning of a long career in TV and film when he made this episode. You may know him best as the voice of Stretch, the ghost in Casper.
How dare you serve these ass-sucking intruders before us?
His other movies include The Water Dance and Meatballs 2. Joe's TV credits include Curb Your Enthusiasm, The Sweet Life on Deck, Northern Exposure, and Murphy Brown. He also does voice work in cartoons and video games. You can listen for him in Justice League Unlimited, Superman the Animated Series, and Mafia 2. Peter, what did you think of Joe Napote as Leo Lunatic Epps?
He's a lot of fun, and not just because he beats up Chachi. You can tell that he thinks of himself as very eloquent, and that's not quite accurate. There's a running gag that he writes poetry before his matches, like Muhammad Ali, but unlike Muhammad Ali, he is not very good at it. But he's very confident about how not very good at it he is, which is fun.
Joe Napote amused me to no end in this episode. He plays this part so over the top. It's hilarious. I loved what a snarling, scowling bad guy he was through the entire episode, what a poor sport he is. I loved his bad poetry. I love the whole performance. Joe Napote goes way beyond what he needed to do with a part like this, and I applaud him for it. Thank you for making this episode much more fun. We also have Arthur Batanitis as the referee.
First bell, fight. Second bell, stop. Shake hands, come out, fight.
This is Arthur's fifth and final appearance on Happy Days. We first saw him way back in season 1 in The Skin Game, and he was even the Claw in The Claw Meets the Fonz. Arthur was an extremely prolific character actor from Tacoma, Washington, who worked steadily in films and TV from the early 1950s to the late 1980s. He may be best known for appearing once on Star Trek and for his recurring role as Mr. Kirkland in the Police Academy movies. But he had dozens and dozens of credits. Arthur died in the year 2000 at the age of 76. Peter, any thoughts on Arthur Batanitis as our referee?
I am so happy that he got to make a final appearance on Happy Days. My headcanon is that every character he plays is an identical twin brother, because there is precedence for that on Happy Days with Al and Father Del Vecchio.
I like that theory, tying all the eras of Happy Days together. Arthur Batanitis is a little bit like Warren Berlinger in that he would come back every couple seasons and do another part, and I'm glad they found something for him in the final season of Happy Days. Speaking of identical twins, we have real-life twin brothers Andy and Peter Steinfeld as Reginald and Elijah Bandini. They're the brothers of celebrity fitness trainer Jake Steinfeld, a.k.a. Body by Jake, and Peter is the father of actress and singer Haley Steinfeld. On his own, Andy appeared on Married with Children, The Edge, and In Living Color, plus the movies The Flintstones, which was directed by Happy Days alum Brian Levant. Peter also appeared on Married with Children, though never alongside Andy. His other credits include Matlock, Martin, Sisters, and Father Dowling Mysteries with Tom Bosley. He was also a personal trainer on the films The Principal, Made in USA, and Limit Up, and an assistant director on The Craft. Peter, what did you think of the Steinfeld brothers as the Bandini brothers?
They were also a lot of fun. They don't really do much, but what they get to do is very fun, and I love just how glum they are after they lose the Rumble.
We told everybody we'd beat you this time.
We've been saying that for 7 years.
That is their funniest moment, when they lose the fight with Fonzie and then slump dejectedly out of Arnold's. These are complete goofball characters who have no real connection to the real world and no real bearing on the story that much, but I'm just glad that they're there. This is a little Baroque touch on the part of the writers, bringing in these two giants with great mustaches, by the way. I love their mustaches.
With great mustache comes great responsibility.
And last but not least, we have Sean O'Grady as Tiger Thompson, Chachi's first opponent, the one he beats.
Tiger, Thompson!
Sean is a real boxer from Austin, Texas. He's a former WBA lightweight champion with a record of 81 wins and 5 losses, though his career was winding down when he did this episode of Happy Days. He has a handful of other screen credits, including an episode of Silk Stockings, the movies Judgment Night and Savage Streets, and a couple of video games in the Knockout Kings franchise. Since retiring from boxing, Sean has become a realtor. Peter, any thoughts on Sean O'Grady as Tiger Thompson?
Sadly, he doesn't really get a ton to do compared to Leo or the Bandini twins, but he fulfilled a narrative function.
He does indeed, and I would have to say that if Sean O'Grady was a real boxer and he convincingly gets beat by Scott Baio in this episode, then that is an example of great acting.
True.
As for songs this week, at Arnold's during the opening scene, we hear Sheila by Tommy Rowe, a #1 hit from 1962.
Sweet little Sheila, you see her, blue eyes and a ponytail.
Henry Winkler improvises a little song about the Bandini brothers as he walks into Arnold's.
They're here again. Who's here?
Yeah, that was a fun little one.
And as Joni and Chachi converse at Arnold's, we hear very faintly an instrumental version of One Fine Day by the Chiffons. And I point that out because I had to watch the scene 4 or 5 times before I could determine what that song is in the background. And it turned out to be one that Happy Days had played like a dozen times before.
Was it worth it? No, it wasn't.
We appreciate your thoroughness anyway.
As for cultural and historical references, this episode takes its title from Love Story, the very successful 1970 film in which Ryan O'Neal and Ally McGraw play college students from opposite sides of the tracks who overcome various obstacles on their way to romance.
You look stupid and rich.
Actually, I'm smart and poor.
I'm smart and poor.
Only to meet with tragedy at the end. Peter, have you actually seen Love Story?
No, I have not. All I know about it is the line, love means never having to say you're sorry, and the fact that it made the name Jennifer super popular for decades after it came out.
Oh, there were so many Jennifers in my elementary school, and we have Ally McGraw to blame for it. Fonzie says the Bandini brothers are playing catch with a VW.
They're right outside. They're warming up playing catch with a VW.
Volkswagen first started shipping its cars to America in 1949, but the compact VW Beetle didn't really catch on here until the 1960s, when its small size made it a popular punchline for comedians and cartoonists.
Try looking at a Volkswagen this way. It's the only small car with a sealed steel bottom that leaves nothing exposed beneath it.
Fonzie says the governor's going to declare your face a disaster area.
I'm going to hit you so hard, the governor's going to declare your face a disaster area.
At the time of the story, circa 1964, the governor of Wisconsin was a man named John W. Reynolds, Jr., a former attorney general and future district judge. Back then, Wisconsin governors only served 2-year terms. Reynolds was elected in 1962, then lost in 1964. He left basically no legacy. You don't really have time for a legacy in 2 years. Chachi compares Fonzie to the Lone Ranger and says, I'm not even Tonto, I'm Silver.
No, it's like he's the Lone Ranger and I'm not even Tonto. I'm Silver.
The Lone Ranger had already acquired his famous horse Silver when he debuted on Detroit radio in January 1933, but his faithful Indian companion Tonto did not appear for another month. So there was like a month where it was just the Lone Ranger? That's kind of weird. Who did he talk to? His horse?
I guess.
Joni says Fonzie still buys her Raggedy Ann perfume.
Really still buys me Raggedy Ann perfume.
Oh, is that what you're wearing?
The famous rag doll created by Johnny Cruel in 1915 did have her own perfume for a while from a company called Giftique. Each bottle came packed in a little box with a miniature Raggedy Ann doll inside. This seems to have been a 1970s thing, however.
Raggedy Ann, I love you, my little Raggedy Ann.
There's a joke in this episode about how bad the perfume smells. I don't think it probably smelled that bad. I'm guessing it was just very sweet smelling and floral. Or maybe it smelled like old rag dolls. I don't know. Roger says, no pain, no gain.
Remember, no pain, no gain, pal. Here we go. Let's get him up, Roger.
This is wildly anachronistic. That phrase didn't enter the lexicon until 1982 when Jane Fonda used it during her aerobics videos.
Oh my God, that was her? Her influence. Wow.
Howard says he's seen all the great boxing matches, and he mentions Ross Armstrong and Louis Schmeling.
Listen, Chachi, I'm a fight expert. I've seen all the great ones. Ross Armstrong, Louis Schmeling fight, Marion and me in our honeymoon.
In 1938, Henry Armstrong successfully challenged Barney Ross for the welterweight championship in what was supposedly a thrilling fight. Armstrong is still considered one of the greatest boxers of all time. Joe Louis fought German boxer Max Schmeling twice, once in 1936, again in 1938, both times at Yankee Stadium. The fights were widely seen as battles between America and Germany. You know how it is when one country fights another country, people think of it as one government versus another government.
Yeah, that's what Rocky IV is all about.
When Schmeling knocked out the American in their first bout, it was the only time Louis had ever lost by KO. Fans supposedly left the stadium in tears. Louis soundly defeated Schmeling in the rematch, putting the German in the hospital and cracking several of his vertebrae. Peter, were you familiar with the Joe Louis-Max Schmeling saga?
Familiar in that I knew the basics of what happened, but not familiar in the sense of being familiar.
Fonzie says, is Huckleberry Hound funny?
Hey, is Huckleberry Hound funny? Whoa!
The Huckleberry Hound Show was Hanna-Barbera's second TV series after Rough and Ready. It ran from 1958 to 1961. The show won an Emmy, the first ever for an animated series, and launched an even more popular spin-off, The Yogi Bear Show. Huck was a laid-back, easygoing blue hound dog with a southern twang very reminiscent of Andy Griffith.
I was so gay, but I couldn't tell anyone.
The Hanna-Barbera franchise that I was more familiar with was Scooby-Doo. I will say that Huckleberry Hound is one of many, many, many Hanna-Barbera characters featured on Jellystone, and he's a lot of fun on that. There was also recently a comic book with him as part of the Hanna-Barbera Beyond initiative. I say recently, I think it was like 2016.
Leo Epps badly misquotes Muhammad Ali's famous line, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. He changes it to float like a battleship. A few episodes ago, Peter, I said that Ali uttered this famous line before the Rumble in the Jungle against George Foreman in 1974. But he first said it in 1964, a full decade earlier, before fighting Sonny Liston. So I was wrong on that one. I'm going to take the L on that one.
Well, I must be punished then, mustn't I? You're a naughty boy!
Chachi says he's going to do his impression of Senior Wences.
I'm just doing my impression of Senior Wences. Oh, yeah? Yeah. It's all right. It's all right. That's good. Yeah.
Senior Wences was a Spanish ventriloquist who became very popular in America due to his numerous TV appearances in the 1950s and 60s, especially on The Ed Sullivan Show. One of his signature bits was talking to his hand. S'all right was his catchphrase.
All right, all right.
I think we've talked about Senior Wences before because he's been referenced on Happy Days earlier. You seem not that familiar with Senior Wences.
Only through The Muppet Show.
Roger says, this is the most exciting thing that's happened to me since Yale beat Harvard at lacrosse.
Isn't this great? You know, this is the most exciting thing that's happened to me since Yale beat Harvard at lacrosse. Good.
Both Yale and Harvard have lacrosse teams, and in fact, there's an entire Ivy League division in lacrosse, but it doesn't look like one team dominates the other. It looks like sometimes Yale wins, sometimes Harvard wins. I have never seen lacrosse being played ever. Have you?
No, I haven't.
Other observations this week. This episode further illustrates why Joni and Chachi are a bad couple. They get along so much better when they are not dating. In this episode, they're much more at ease with each other than they ever were when they were a couple. Peter, what did you think of the Joni and Chachi relationship in this episode?
They get along remarkably well, and Joni is entirely right when she tells Chachi to just talk to Fonzie, because Chachi might think that Fonzie is not impressed by talk, but Joni knows him very well too, and she knows that Fonzie can be a reasonable guy sometimes.
Chachi's hand injury looks painful, but not like the kind of thing that would actually break any bones. But even if his hand is broken, why doesn't he go to the hospital after the fight? Fonzie takes him to Arnold's for ice cream instead. Peter, what is the extent of Chachi's hand injury, do you think?
It's difficult to say. He seems to be in enough pain to not want to use it at all, but nobody thinks to take him to the hospital.
In a way, this episode reminded me a little bit of Fonzie's blindness in that the entire plot hinges on this one injury that doesn't look all that convincing.
Yeah.
I could not help but notice all the excellent signage in this episode. From the banners identifying Hank's gym and the Milwaukee boxing tournament to the very neat signs and banners hoisted by Chachi's fans, we have learned in the past that neat signage is a hallmark of the Gary Marshall shows. Have you started noticing all those signs in his shows?
Yes.
I saw the sign and it opened up my eyes. I saw the sign.
This is supposedly the only episode in which Fonzie actually hits someone, at least on camera. I don't know if that's true, but I can't think of another example offhand. Can you think of another time when Fonzie actually hits a guy?
Off the top of my head, no, I can't. Some of Fonzie's most noticeable quote-unquote fights have been one where he doesn't actually throw any punches.
His normal strategy is to try to avoid being hit. Earlier in this episode, when he fights the Bandini brothers, he doesn't punch them at all. He just flips them over on their backs and sends them on their way.
Come on, boys. It's over.
Does it bother me that there's no apostrophe on the Fonzie's cousin robe? Yes, Peter, it does. Did that bother you at all, or am I just being super nitpicky here?
Maybe it cost money to have the letters embroidered onto it, and so Fonzie just figured, you can skip the apostrophe to save money.
Apostrophes should be free. Let's free the apostrophes, Peter.
The crux of the biscuit is the apostrophe.
And as Chachi and Fonzie leave the gym at the end of the episode, a crew member very briefly gets into the shot. You can look for him in the lower left corner.
Here he comes.
Boogie there, boogie there.
There he goes.
Boogie there, boogie there.
I don't know why that stuff is amusing to me. Do you look for that kind of stuff in movies and TV shows? Are you happy to find it?
Sometimes I do.
Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
Outside of the Fonzie's cousin robe, no, not really.
I guess I like the sleeveless jean jackets that the Bandini brothers were wearing.
Cute might not be the right word, but they kind of were very cute.
Let's go ahead and call them cute. The Bandini brothers are kind of adorable in this episode. So, Peter, did you have any other observations you wanted to make about Glove's story?
I love the fact that in a matter of 0 to 60, Marion goes from being dismayed by the boxing match
How can two men get in there and intentionally hurt each other? I don't know.
to shouting for Chachi to completely destroy his opponent.
Come on, Chachi, rip his lips off!
I love that for her.
I love that moment too. And Marion Ross once again really commits to the joke and becomes this snarling beast at ringside during Chachi's fight. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
For a Chachi-centric episode, surprisingly, yes. I'm not just saying that because we get to see Chachi suffer physically throughout this episode. There's a lot of very fun stuff, like the Marion joke I mentioned. There's a very sweet scene at the end where Chachi and Fonzie just talk through their issues. And there's also the funny yet troubling running gag about Roger's fixation on the East German exchange student who he got deported because she beat him in a fight. I think Roger might be an asshole.
Roger has a weird backstory that is revealed a little bit at a time through a lot of these episodes. This may be one of the best Chachi episodes there's ever been. There's so much funny stuff happening all through it. I loved all the stuff at the gym where they're training for the fight. I loved all the little weird side jokes like Marion going crazy at the fight and just the way Leo Lunatic Epps comports himself through this entire episode. And of course, the Bandini brothers. This episode proved to me that the way to do a good Chachi story is not to have anything to do with a Joni romance plot angle. Just get that right out of the equation. I really disliked the Ballad of Joni and Chachi just a few weeks ago, and I like this one quite a lot. So maybe I've hit on the secret formula for how to do a good Chachi story. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter, or I guess X, at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Blue Sky at petervolfrank.bsky.social.
For the time being, they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. I don't know how long that's going to last. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Roger becomes the new principal at George S. Patton High School, and Fonzie tags along in vocational education.
This episode has not one, but two of my favorite Happy Days guest appearances of all time, so I'm very excited to talk about it. See you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.